What's up, everybody? Welcome back into another episode of the Lawyer You Know podcast. And I'm incredibly excited about today because we've been talking about this Uvalde school shooting case, and there are so many nuances and difficulties with dealing with tragedy, dealing with a monster that was in the school, and then criminal charges coming from law enforcement or for law enforcement officers who are supposed to be there to protect and serve. But what are their duties? What are their jobs? If they fail, should it be civil? Should it be criminal? Very few lawyers have taken this type of case all the way to trial. Very few people have experienced what everyone in that courtroom this week, right now, are experiencing. But we've gotten, in my opinion, the best to do it on one of the biggest stages as our guest today to break down what it's like to fight a case like this, what some of the pressure points are, how you deal with it as a lawyer, how you deal with the monster in the room that is not your client, how you deal with very sympathetic witnesses and jurors that come in wanting justice for the victims in their community. We're going to get to ask Mark Eiglarsh all those questions right now. Let's get to it. Mark, you're back.
Buddy, thank you for having me. Understand that I would have said no all day long, except for two reasons. One, I think you're extraordinary. I really do. I love the work you do. I don't want anything from you. I'm just telling you. I love your podcast. I think you're great. And secondly, I really do think this is an important topic. And I love talking about it. I had no idea that Peterson, my case, was going to be put under the microscope the way that it was. I just thought I'm defending a very innocent, dedicated, decent cop. I didn't know that the world looked at it as the single and only test case. You mentioned that there were others. There aren't. Mine apparently was the only time a cop was prosecuted for inactivity, essentially. And I didn't realize the significance. People told me they broke into the news to do the verdict. I'm like, I was in my own world for 4 years, dedicating myself to somebody that I just thought was innocent. That was the significance to me.
Yeah. And was this case had already happened? The Uvalde case happened before your trial, didn't it?
Trying to remember.
I think it did. I think I had it as a comparison in my mind. Like, what happened there versus here.
Yes. But they certainly had not announced that they were going to bring criminal charges against anyone.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
In
not
fact,
that I know.
No, I do remember. Hold on. I do remember, Peter, because I kept saying, Uvalde happened. They didn't bring any charges against those guys, and they waited 77 minutes. I remember saying that now, and boy, did they bring charges. Yeah.
Yeah. And so just as introduction, Scot Peterson, resource officer at the Parkland shooter case, Mark represented him when charges were filed in that case. Why don't we just start out just to give us kind of the lay of the land? What are the differences in the charges in Peterson's case versus the Gonzalez case that's happening right now? Because that makes a difference.
I think it's kind of similar. I mean, they can call them different things. It's like calling a beggar a roadside entrepreneur. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's the same thing. I think that they're saying that he had a duty, both officers had a duty to protect these students, and a legal duty, and we can debate that all day long, a legal duty to protect the students. And by his inactivity or their inactivity, they failed to do so. And as a result, they both were criminally negligent. That's where you need to be to find someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, that they were criminally negligent.
Because we all know there's a civil side to everything, and damages were caused, lives were taken. And if there was a duty that was breached and it caused the damages, that is the civil negligence that lawsuits can be filed. Some were filed against Peterson. I think there's still some open ones. I'm sure they're being filed in the Uvalde case, but it's another level up from the civil negligence to get to the criminal negligence. And you can hear it in the language in this case, and the same language was used in your trial as well.
Big time. And by the way, while Peterson was acquitted quite some time ago, in May, he's going to trial in the civil case. He wants me to represent him. I'm like, no way. First of all, I'm not my area of expertise. And I've been there and done that. It's too traumatic. And I'm still post-traumatic from every day waking up and submerging myself into a school where somebody is killing children, living my worst nightmare. It's the absolute worst. And I don't even like talking about it to some extent. But he's still still fighting over that case. He still has to sit through a civil trial. It's crazy.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that when tragedy strikes, especially when the person that is the number one person at fault can't make it right in the civil justice system, which is with money, um, they look other areas. Now, can Peterson afford the type of damages they're probably talking about? Probably not. So where do they think they're going to get the money from? Are there insurance companies, sovereign immunity type things involved? Probably. But the civil side is something separate. The criminal side is where your expertise was, where you're the guy, in my opinion. And you see this case coming. And what was your thought when you saw that charges were brought? Did you think, oh, good, because this is different than Parkland? Did you think, no, they still have it wrong? These officers should not be criminally liable for this monsters act. And I keep using that phrase monster because that was a big deal in your trial that I thought was the perfect way to handle it and make the jury understand we all hate this guy. Okay. We're all on the same team. We all hate this guy, but that's not this guy. So let's make sure we're thinking about the criminal acts of this guy, if there are any. So what did you think when you heard this case coming up the pipe?
Well, first I said, it's time for me to get to know this case, meaning Uvalde. I didn't know much about it except for what I saw in the media, and I wouldn't do what most people do and what I condemn them for. Looking at little excerpts in the media and then saying, I know the case. I got to do my homework, and I encourage everybody to really do their homework. Don't just go by the media. Media just, they regurgitate. Sometimes they get it right. Most of the time they don't. They only give you a small portion. So I said, let me go really figure this out. I reached out to Nick, one of the attorneys for the Uvalde officer, and I've been, helping him and conversing with him and supporting him only after I learned what the facts really were, because I went in with an open mind. I said, look, Peterson, Snow White innocent, thrown under the bus, politically sacrificed. Maybe the guy there, I don't know, maybe he went for donuts. He said, all right, you go have at it, kill those kids. I'm going to go get some donuts or something. That would then open up the discussion to criminal charges. But no, I looked at what he did. We can get into the minutia. And I went, oh my God, it's almost the same thing. You got someone at the top who's taking heat from the media. And right away, like in my case, I give you the sacrificial officer. And you blame officers for really failures within the police department. But you single out an officer so those with the pitchforks can get their blood. And even though the facts didn't seem to support that he knew where the shooter was exactly and could have acted and could have taken him out before he got into the school.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. I'm having flashbacks to Peterson's trial because there's so much of the similar rhetoric of what did they know then?
Yes.
What were they hearing and seeing and doing?
Yes.
And when you hear gunshots, how it echoes, you can't tell where they're coming from, almost verbatim, getting on the walkie-talkie, saying, this is what I'm hearing and seeing, telling other officers, like doing some of the duties that you would expect an officer to do. Now, at the end of the day, the hardest thing that you had to deal with and that they have to deal with is they didn't stop him, and that they didn't stop him from hurting children and killing children. And that's something the jury is going to have in their mind.
Okay, so let me add something to what you said earlier, the similarities. What people don't understand, and I didn't until I represented Peterson, is that there's things called auditory exclusion, where someone can claim that they told you something, but you don't hear it because you are the most stressed you could ever possibly be. And we all can agree that cops aren't superheroes. They're just human beings. So you don't hear certain things. There's tunnel vision where you're focused on something. So then when they claim, well, you could have seen this, you should have seen this. I just didn't. And the problem is because children are dead and because politics play such a role, they want to get to the point where they prosecute and hold someone responsible and sacrifice them, that they don't then give the benefit of the doubt to the officers on these nuances like, well, maybe you didn't hear or maybe you didn't see, right? And so that's the first problem. If it's even a close call, you give the officer the benefit of the doubt. And they have not done that both in Peterson and in Gonzalez.
It's the new year, which means everybody is on a health kick. And it's so annoying when you get these misleading, quote unquote, healthy meals that actually aren't. Well, today's sponsor, Green Chef, helps you cut through all the noise, and they are the trusted authority in clean eating, delivering only real farm-sourced ingredients. You can trust every bite with over 40 clean, customizable weekly recipes designed to give you peace of mind. Since I busted my shoulder up and it's going to be a pretty brutal start to the new year, I can't just eat whatever I want. I have to make sure I'm eating clean and healthy. It's going to be a rough road here probably in 2026, but I'm really excited to be able to do that with Green Chef. So I'm really thankful that they are sponsoring, because every Green Chef box delivers certified organic produce and responsibly sourced proteins and seafood. That means avoiding ultra-processed fillers. And everyone says that's the worst thing you can eat. So right now, go to greenchef.com/LYKGraza and use code LYKGRAZA to get started with 50% off Green Chef plus free Graza olive oil set in your second and third boxes. This 50% off offer is only available for a limited time, so don't wait. That's code LYKGraza at greenchef.com/LYKGRAZA. And really what is sad about it is you said 77 minutes earlier, and you talked about some of the news clippings, and I saw some of the videos where it just looks like the officers are standing in the hallway doing nothing while children are dying, and it's hard to watch. It's brutal to think about. And as human beings, before we're lawyers, I understand, wanting to hold people responsible and hold people accountable. But as somebody who prosecuted cases and made charging decisions, that's a prosecutor as a gatekeeper to look at it and see if laws were broken. Not internal investigations, not people being fired, not changing rules, not getting better walkie-talkies, not getting better door locks and having civil ramifications for what happened. But are there criminal charges for individuals that are appropriate? That's what the prosecutor needs to do. That's their job. And when they looked at this case and they decided to do it, now we're seeing how they're presenting the evidence, at least against Gonzalez, because there is another one in this case, which is also different than Peterson. But we're seeing the charges against Gonzalez, and we're 3 days into trial. We're recording this during Friday when testimony is going on right now, so we don't know what they necessarily are testifying to. But so much of it thus far has been emotional, discussing what happened to those kids. And how do you deal with that as a defense attorney, knowing the jury's hearts are broken at this point in the trial?
I mean, I had PTSD when I was watching Gonzalez's lawyers argue to the judge why the autopsy photos, dead kids on a silver slab in the morgue, somehow is more probative than prejudicial, which is the balance that they have to perform. I couldn't believe that the judge's words were not, no, I agree with you, defense. That should not come into evidence. In our case, unfortunately, in Peterson, over my vehement objection, the judge let most of those photos in, unredacted, children who are literally on the stairwells with blood coming out. It was horrible. But at least there was more merit to that argument, because it was on the scene and they were trying to show, where the path of the shooter and what happened. They came up with some bullshit that was a thinly veiled argument that really was just all about just making sure the jurors were prejudiced the maximum. That's what they're doing. I mean, this is a prosecutor in Uvalde case who's crying during opening statements. It's all about sympathy. Clearly, that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think that this case so far has been a strange starter for me, because the teachers that have testified, which I do want to get to one of the teachers, and even the FBI expert where the casings were and talking about the movement of the shooter, I haven't really heard 3 days of testimony, basically 2 days of testimony. And I haven't heard them talk about much of what Gonzalez did, where he was, what he should have been doing, what his duty was, what he knew at the time. Like, when are they going to get there? I get you have to set the stage, but it seems like a weird strategy.
So most people don't realize this. It's important to know that Gonzalez isn't charged with not going in and killing the killer like Peterson was. Literally, he's being judged for the 1 minute.
It's crazy.
He arrives on the scene close enough where then during that 1 minute, allegedly, he is supposed to have seen the shooter, which he claims he never saw because the shooter was on the west side and he's on the south side. And I take him at his word. I believe that. So that's it. It's 1 minute. Why didn't you kill him before he went in? Oh, because he was on the other side and I didn't see him. That's it. Done. But no, that's what they're holding him accountable for. Now, the other guy, Redondo, I think his name is, the police chief, he's going to argue, and we can talk about that, but I believe he's going to argue that, look, you're either dealing with an active shooter or a barricaded suspect. I learned this in Peterson. So active shooter, you go in, you just confront. He's killing people, you go. Well, they went into the hot zone. They did go to confront, but then they were shot upon. So then, whoa, you don't want officers dead. They then immediately took cover. And then I believe what you're going to hear is them saying that we believed at that point we're dealing with a barricaded suspect. The policy then is wait, control, contain, call in SWAT, bring in a negotiator. Is it the wrong call? It might have been. In hindsight, I think one would say it was with what we know now. But getting it wrong doesn't mean that it's criminal. We can't hold these cops up to perfection.
Yeah, and it's a hard discussion, if I'm being honest. It's a hard discussion because this comes down to, and you and I probably agree on this, there are laws that frustrate me. The way they're written, the definitions, I'm like, why is it like this? Why is this illegal? Why you can so clearly catch somebody who was doing nothing wrong in the way this law is written, and technically speaking, with the literal translation, yes, they might be guilty of a crime. I've been frustrated with that in the past, and this is kind of a similar situation where I wish they did more. I wish the lives would have been saved. I wish.
Me too.
Yes.
Me too.
Yeah, I know
Me
you
too.
feel that way.
Yeah.
But being frustrated with the procedures, the unlocked door, the fact that the walkie-talkies weren't working in there, and being pissed off and angry about that, we have to keep that separate from, can they prove Gonzalez committed a crime? And the time limitation to me. So I did not know a ton about this case before watching the trial, besides what, I've seen in the media, which I knew was going to be, whatever. And the media, as we all know, likes it better when we're all angry and fighting and saying, this guy should go to prison for the rest of his life and whatever. But when we're actually starting to listen to the case, the time limitation to me is something I didn't know. And it's clear that the defense is focusing on that. And I think that's important because what I've learned from your trial, which is, what can you know? How quickly can you process? And if you have a step-by-step SOP, a standard operating procedure, then you're thinking about going to the next step, that doesn't happen immediately. Mm-hmm. You're not getting the information and simultaneously knowing exactly what to do with it. Sometimes you got to think. And there's almost no time for thinking in the state's timeline, which the defense, outside the presence of the jury, has argued they're being very vague and just kind of, here is the timing, and the defense is going to the second. And I thought the opening was great with their demonstrative aids, to where I think this is going to be very difficult to prove.
Yeah, it actually mirrors our trial in that they were trying to be general. Mm-hmm. I also broke it down. Okay, so he gets to the scene at this time. There were kids already dead. He can't be held responsible for that, okay? He gets on the scene. He's waiting. There's no report at that moment where precisely the shooter is. You break it down second by second by second, which is what they did very effectively in the second. It was weird that there were two lawyers.
I thought so too.
I liked the opening. Though. It was effective. I think Nick should have done the whole thing. It was great. But they broke it down second by second, and then you're going, well, wait, how should he have known? Where it's silly. It doesn't even get to the point, in my opinion, of negligence. I think that criminal negligence is not even up for discussion in that Gonzalez case.
Another difference I thought was actually better for them than your case is he wasn't assigned and just supposed to be at that school all the time, but he got the call. They did a good job of convincing me so far that this guy put on the cape and was going in and trying to do something. Now, he didn't do it. He didn't accomplish the goal of saving the kids. Yeah. But he took the first step that he didn't have to take.
Yeah. You're reminding me of something that really offended me that prosecutor, that crying prosecutor said. He said, all he did was get on the radio and say that there were shots fired. All right. First of all, let's flip that. He did his job and announced shots fired. What that does is it alerts the responders to come to the scene. Then things are locked down. First of all, to his credit, he did that. The absence of that would put us in the discussion of, well, he was negligent, maybe even criminally negligent, meaning you hear shots fired and you jump in your car and you take off. No. So first he gets on the radio. But what the prosecutor left out was, wait, he went into the hot zone. He actually went there where the shooter was. He helped kids. There's body cam footage of him helping kids out of the window. So at great peril, because you don't know if you're going to get shot, he's helping kids out of the window. He got the keys from the janitor, the master keys, which somehow helped. He got the floor plan, the map of the school. All these things he did do Why didn't the prosecutor say that in opening if we're really seeking to be fair and just?
Yeah, and the whole thing with the radio, if I was them, because he did that in this case and didn't necessarily have to, kind of stepped into it, I would highlight how that is literally part of their procedures. And cops have radios because radios save lives. That's how they share information when they're not in the same location, when they're circling a school or a target or whatever. Radios are lifesavers, literally. So he's using the life-saving mechanisms that they have.
Yes.
Now, they still have more time to prove the case, obviously. And I do think there is an opportunity for them to prove criminal negligence, in my opinion, right? We may be on different spots on that because I want to talk about this first teacher that testified, but the FBI guy testifying to where there are shell casings near where Gonzalez was, and the teacher maybe saying she saw somebody that matched the shooter's description near where Gonzalez was. If they can provide testimony that Gonzalez was right by the shooter and fled and ran away and didn't do anything to try and help or stop him, I can be still convinced that there is some criminal negligence here if they can prove those facts. Now,
okay. News break. I don't know that you know this yet, but that teacher you just talked about, you agree that's compelling testimony. Here's a teacher saying that the shooter was right there. You should have been able to see him. Are you with me?
I'm with you.
The judge excluded her testimony.
I know, completely.
Oh, so you know that?
Yes. Okay. So that's why I kept saying I want to talk about her, because I've never seen this procedure.
All right. So here's the problem. Yes. I don't know how you don't grant a motion for mistrial, because essentially this woman is saying something so compelling that goes to the heart of this case. It would be the equivalent of saying, all right, Peter's viewers, okay, lawyer, viewers, listen, I want you to imagine there's a tiger on a unicycle. Are you with me? And that tiger is wearing a Nazi helmet and he's juggling pink balls. Can you picture that? Okay. Wait. Strike that out of your mind. Never mind. Forget that. Don't ever remember that again. I don't ever want you to remember that or think about that during the course of this trial. Really? We just heard this woman say some compelling, damning stuff that really did damage the defense's case. And then, we're just going to exclude it. Just don't think about it.
Yeah, and I want to talk through that for a second. So I thought potentially if I was the judge, I would have granted a mistrial without prejudice, let him refile personally. It was only a day. You have to pick a new jury. You could probably do that next week, theoretically. Like, it really wouldn't have been that horrible.
It would have been pretty bad.
I get it. I get the argument on the other side. I'm just saying, like, to protect everything and not necessarily just throw the case out, even though it was held against the prosecution easily, I thought that would have been an easy remedy. It didn't seem like the defense wanted that wholeheartedly, which my guess is they like the jury. That's the only thing I can think.
There you
go.
They
like the jury.
Yeah.
But then the remedy the judge did give, I've never seen given before. I've never seen offered before. I have asked for things kind of similar to that. The defense wanted to, quote unquote, unring the bell. They played her entire police interview 4 days after the shooting, and they cross-examined her. They got out in front of the jury that the prosecution found this out, withheld it from them, didn't tell them. And then right after that, that was the last question. Then the judge gets up, strikes her testimony. I have never seen that offer before. I've seen judges strike testimony, strike a witness. Have you seen that happen before? Where
no, hell no.
A whole day? That's so weird.
That's so bizarre. That's a judge who won't, take care of autopsy photos up front. It's just bizarre. Texas, come on, give me a break. Texas, where a person a lawyer slept through a death penalty case, and the guy was convicted. He got the death penalty, and the appellate court said, yes, we acknowledge that the defense lawyer should have been sleeping, but he didn't sleep through significant portions of the trial. So we're going to uphold the conviction. What? Okay. Really, Texas? Okay.
That I didn't know about.
Yeah, it's stupid, ridiculous. Well, he slept during, it wasn't really that important,
Yeah, he was tired.
Right, he was tired. But yeah, I think that's great for the defense. I actually wanted to connect with Nick, the lawyer, and see how he feels about that. But I would imagine he would tell me, no, this is great for us,
Yeah, I don't see how they see it any other way, except for what you're saying. Those things that she said, if they're trying to piece together where the shooter was, which I assume they are, and again, this prosecution team, it's strange to me. It doesn't feel like they know the case, because when he's asking them, is there any other witness or testimony that's going to put the shooter on the south end? They're like, I think the casings or speak for themselves, or they don't answer the judge. Like, is there another witness going to testify to this?
But that's exactly how they handled the questions from the judge regarding the autopsy photos when they said, well, tell us how they're probative. I think they do know the answers, but there's nothing that helps them.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else who's going to support your theory? Oh, well, Judge, the answer is no, Judge. No. In fact, no, there's no value of introducing photographs of dead kids in a morgue, not on the scene when the defense is conceding death. No, but he can't do that. And I don't like that. Those are intellectually dishonest prosecutors. I don't like that.
So I didn't see the beginning arguments about the pictures. I just started with kind of opening statements.
It's worth seeing. It's worth seeing.
Because I've liked this judge. I like the judge's demeanor. I liked how he handled the witness. I like the remedy he gave the defense, which I think, and even helped the defense because the defense was like, well, Judge, we know we have to ask for a mistrial, but we're not sure we want to. He's like, well, I'm going to deny it anyways. So they're like, okay, then we do ask. You deny it. We don't think this remedy is good enough, but here's a remedy we would like. So it's protected for appeal, but they were able to get the remedy they wanted in this trial with this jury, which I think he did help them out, and how he handled the witness saying, this isn't your fault. We appreciate you being here. I appreciated that he did that because she was probably going to feel like she screwed something up because her testimony got stricken when it was all on the prosecutors, not on her.
Right. Look, I like the judge's demeanor too. I'll give you that. But any judge, that was a test for me. Any judge who didn't just say, I don't see any relevance to these photos of dead kids in the morgue. Like, to me, I felt like that was being introduced against me and my client in that moment. And I just took that so personally. The
judge from the Peterson case is now on, is it YNW Melly? He's on another case that I'm following. So. I think it's Melly.
Look, I have a lot of respect for that judge.
Yeah.
He's a good person, for the most part, but this is a fact. He asked how much time I needed for my closing. I said, well, Judge, I don't like to be restricted. I don't know exactly how long. I won't be up there a minute longer than I need to prove, what I need to prove. He goes, okay, thank you, Mr. Iglesh. State, how much time do you need? 2 hours. Okay, you'll have 2 hours, Mr. Iglesh. Well, hold on, Judge. If you're now going to absolutely pick a time period, I'll take 3 hours. I need 3 hours. No, it'll be 2 hours. So when I'm up there doing my closing and I needed 20 more minutes to finish because there were technical issues, so that there was time where he wouldn't give me 20 more minutes to finish my closing. To this day, I will never get over that.
Yeah, that's just illogical to me as a judge with a criminal defendant in the room with those rights 20 minutes. It's just crazy. Some judges draw lines places that I don't understand. But yeah, anyways, I just thought that was interesting because I saw his face pop up.
He was good to me otherwise. I mean,
I agree.
Meaning he treated me nicely. The rulings I disagreed a lot with.
Right.
I felt like I was trying the case with two hands behind my back. But I also understand, you've got dead kids' parents looking at him and there's pressure and it isn't an elected position. I get all that. But 20 more minutes just so I can go through the jury instructions? I got that on my PowerPoint. Can I just do that? Fortunately, I had touched on a lot of that. But 20 more minutes. People say, Mark, get over it. You won the case. Yeah, but in spite of that,
Yeah, no, I don't know if I've ever tried a case where I felt like the judge did a great job on all the rulings. Like, I feel like most of them, at the end of it, I'm like, man, they screwed up. I'm calling appellate counsel in my last trial. I'm calling appellate counsel like, we're going to appeal this. This judge is screwing up left and right. And we got a great verdict. So I was like, whatever. But it is frustrating during it. And you're so hyper focused on everything. And when you have a case like this where the world might be against you. How did you feel during your trial? Did you feel like the world wanted Peterson to go down because these kids died and he didn't stop the killer? Is that how you felt during the trial?
Absolutely. Okay. Do you know that I brought in Wall Street Journal, New York Times. I brought all these people in individually and went over the evidence. And most of these reporters went, you know what? Oh my God, I didn't realize this. And they would tell me privately, yeah, oh my God. Like, I'm not even sure why he was charged. They would be honest. And then they'd print these ridiculous articles, that seemed to be against Peterson. And a lot of them would say, well, I wrote it one way, but the editors changed it, especially the local paper here. Sorry, it's my editor. So I felt like, and I still feel, that's part of the reason why I'm on your show. Any chance I get to tell the world how screwed over my client got, and trying to, like, I was hoping after the not guilty that he would get his name back, that they would recognize this unbelievable, highly decorated officer, and they would praise him. And unfortunately, that's unrealistic. And so it was very difficult every day. I felt the world was against me, and it was the toughest 4 years of my life, candidly.
It's a life ruiner, right? And we know that. And that's sometimes the very difficult thing to have the conversation with our client, that we're here, we might win, but intelligent clients like him and probably like this defendant in this case, they know like it's never going to be the same. Once you get, accused of something like this and you have to go through the rigmarole and you're dragged through the mud. And frankly, I just noticed we have a special guest here that popped in thanks to Mark, that understanding what it's like to be sitting in the defendant's chair in a trial like this, going through all of the emotions, trusting your attorney, right? Because we haven't talked about whether or not Gonzalez, we think he's going to testify. Should he testify? You had to go through all that with your client, but sitting there as the actual client is impossible for somebody to understand. And again, we have pretty much the only guy that understands that. If you want to introduce him as he comes in.
I will. That was a very tough decision if you want to ask him about it. But Scott from day one wanted to testify. He was eager to tell his truth. But as we all know as trial lawyers, you're not going to turn the trial over to cross-examination, let them have at him. He had to trust me on that. I just said, as much as he wanted to testify, I didn't think that they had proven the case. And boy, I would have lived with regret if somehow it didn't go our way. But anyway, I'll introduce Scot. This is the first appearance Scot has done since we won the case. There he is. Wait a second. That's so funny. The shirt, that literally looks like one of the things they give the prisoners.
Oh, God. Oh,
he's not in prison, guys.
That's the
no, look, there is a logo. There's a logo. No, it's not an inmate.
All right, good.
That's awesome.
So here's what I'll say about Scot. Not just because he's here. I've said this publicly. Scot's a friend. He's not just a client. Scot did work that I would never do. Decades of dedicated law enforcement work. They couldn't find a single person to say anything negative about Scot. Not one person. And contrarily, we had tons of people testify that he's just great. If there was a fight, he would jump in, and award-winning everything. And literally in a couple of minutes, that monster ruined his life, right? And ruined the lives of so many others. And Scot should be praised for what he did. He did everything he could. And we did prove in the trial all the things that Scot did in real time. It looked like to the public, and me too, before I ever met with Scot, he's just standing there doing nothing. But when you really look at the evidence and you listen, he's ordering the code red. He's ordering the video to find out where the shooter's located. He's actively working on a busted radio, but trying to figure out where's the shooter located, asking fellow people. He's saying, stand back, because he doesn't know if he's dealing with a shooter or shooters. There was so much going through his mind that I really feel for him. And I wish I could even do more. I know that I can't get his name back, and I'm trying to, but he deserves praise. So Scot, thank you for being here.
Yeah, Scot, thank you so much, man. It's great to meet you. We've never met. I've watched you a lot and talked to Mark about you some. So I really appreciate you coming on to share some insights with us.
No, Peter, I appreciate it. And just to let you know, I've been watching The Lawyer You Know. Before this ever even happened, I was watching your podcast.
Wow, I didn't know that.
To be honest with you, you're one of the few that when it comes to, reviewing these trials, you always step back and say, listen, let's hear the facts on both sides before we start, becoming judge, jury, and executioner to some of these defendants. So I've always admired that you've always said, hey, let's listen to both sides before we start making up our mind. Thank you. And thank you. You have a great podcast.
Hey, I really, really appreciate it. It means a lot coming from you, somebody who's been through the process. Yeah. Very difficult. I'm sure people don't like everything I say, right? There's always things I'm going to try to picture how the prosecution sees it, how the defense sees it. But Mark just made a point about how you wanted to get up and tell your story. You wanted to testify. That's something that's a discussion that's going to happen with Gonzalez, the defendant in the Uvalde case. But Mark said, you don't turn it over to the cross. It's not that we're afraid necessarily that our clients are going to say something wrong or lie or whatever it may be. But I have had juries literally say to me, I didn't like the way he pushed his glasses up his nose. I didn't like the way he kept crossing his arms when the prosecutor was asking him questions. Sometimes it's nothing and the jury just doesn't like you, and then you screwed up the case that you had won. What was it like for you sitting in that chair, having those discussions specifically about testifying, and then we'll get your view kind of the trial as a whole?
Sure. Peter, you go as a defendant, sitting there in a trial and every day watching those jurors walk in while you stand up and, and they're looking at you, and they're looking at, here and there. What are you doing? What movements are you doing? And after a few weeks, you're seeing these jurors every day, and in your mind, you're going, oh, no, I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to let these 6 people know exactly what happened. And I thought it was throughout the whole trial, and even before, I used to tell Mark, I used to go, Mark, I'm going to testify. And Mark would always go, we'll see. And I'm going in my mind, yeah, we'll see. No, we'll see. All right. Because I'm not going to sit there and let those 6 people judge me without me having my say. And I'm going to be honest with you, Peter, and Mark will tell you, probably the most contentious time we had was right when it came down to the finish line, and it was time for, okay, are you going to testify? When the judge said, I need to know if your client is going to testify. And I'll never forget, and I'm sure Mark will know it. We went at lunchtime, we sat there, and I looked and said, Mark, I want to testify. And Mark just basically said, Scott, no way are you going to testify? And just like you said, Peter, he said, we need is one of these jurors to say, you know what? I don't like the sound of his tone of his voice. I don't like the way he looked at me. He goes, and it's true, but it is so difficult, sitting there knowing here you are as a criminal defendant, and you have you have a right, a Fifth Amendment right, not to speak. And to think, though, oh my God, if I don't tell these people, they're gonna look, they're gonna judge me, and they're gonna say, look, he didn't even sit there and defend himself. And you always have that fear. But at the end of the day, my life was on the line. But I trusted Mark with my life, literally. And he told me, he said, Scott, I am telling you, there is no way that you need to get up on that stand. The evidence has come out already. They know what you did and what you didn't do. They have your homicide transcript of everything you said 48 hours after the shooting to show that you didn't know. You do not need to get up there. And at the end of the day, a lot of soul searching, but I believed in Mark, and even to this day, and it was the hardest thing I ever did in my life, was saying, fine. And there were tears. Let me tell you, I was in tears. Mark was so, passionate. And he said, Scott, you just have to trust me on this. You had, not only as a lawyer, but as a friend, you have to trust me. This is what we have to do.
It's so crazy. It's bringing me back there. I mean, you have close to 100 years that he's facing. I think it was 96 and a half years. And he would have, that's it. The rest of his life was literally on the line. And should he talk to the jurors or should he not? They want to hear from him. But I felt that we were ahead. I thought that we made our points. That's how I felt.
Yeah. And that is invaluable insight. Like, Mark and I can sit here and talk about what our clients tell us and what they feel and what they think. And I mean, Mark and I have never sat there and had to do that from that side of the table. Right. And from our perspective, it is nerve-wracking. Like, it's your life on the line, but I know how Mark's talked about you and how a lot of these trials go and relationships you can build with some of your clients. We have confidence. We trust our training, our experience, but we feel it. Like, in our soul, we feel it when we're telling our clients what we think that they should do. But from your perspective, I think a lot of people out there that are going to be listening to this assume 99% of the time when the client does not testify, it's like, yeah, they don't want to testify. They're going to get up there. They're too scared. They're not going to defend them. That's what they think. They don't think that most people fight to testify. And I will say, I don't know if I would say it's most. Some do, some don't. Depending on how the case comes out, there is a possibility that, some cases are more likely to have a defendant testify than others. But I've had many clients feel just how you felt, that they want to get up there and testify, even if it's not, quote unquote, legally necessary. And the world just doesn't think that that happens, but it does. And you just explained exactly what we go through a lot.
Yep, exactly. Let me tell you, it was one of the hardest probably decisions, because I knew also that it was my decision, and yeah. Mark even said, Scott, at the end of the day, it is your decision. But that when you believe in your counsel and you believe in your lawyer, and look, you saw that trial, that was a high publicity trial, and there was Mark, just Mark. No team of lawyers. This wasn't like the dream team of O.J. Simpson. This was one man sitting there, with a nation, crucifying me for years. It is just incredible. And I mean, I'll always be grateful for the work that not only Mark, but his family believing in me too. This wasn't just Mark, I had his family believing in me and of my innocence. And then it's,
Scott, I don't know that I told you this, but my daughter, surprisingly, is going to law school to be a criminal defense attorney, fueled primarily by the experience of watching your trial and seeing her dad help an innocent man.
That's fantastic.
That's awesome.
I love it. It's,
that's awesome. It's the new year, but you still need the same old staples for your wardrobe. And for me, being a lawyer, I always need new dress shirts. I wear them under suits. I wear them just with dress pants to work sometimes. And then I need some casual ones for some events. And I just ordered 5 new button-down dress shirts from today's sponsor, Quince. And I'm always impressed with the quality, the look, and how much I just like the different options they have on Quince. And they have blues and blacks and grays and whites, which are the staple type colors that I like to rotate in, especially with all different suits, right? You can wear the same suit with different shirts and it can look completely different. And it's great because I have so many similar shirts, but sometimes you need a refresh and you need to update and get rid of the old ones and bring in the new ones with that fresh, crisp look and feel, so you can refresh your winter wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/LYK for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/LYK. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/LYK.
Yeah,
I think it's cool. Go ahead.
I was just going to tell you, I actually keep this behind my desk because every time I need a dose of happiness, I pull this out.
That's awesome.
I never thought that I'd be dropping tears on a verdict, but for 4 days, I had asked these jurors to take 5 minutes. It doesn't take longer than 5 minutes to pick a 4-person and just to come back and say, this was not proven. He should never have been charged. But 4 days we're living in that courthouse, waiting for the verdict. Oh my God, it was torture.
Yeah, that's the worst part of the job. The worst part of the job is waiting for a verdict. So Scott, when you're sitting there throughout the trial and you see these witnesses come up and there are people you know, people you've worked with, people you saw on scene and basically shared a traumatic event with, people you feel bad for that you realize they've been traumatized, they're victims. What is it like sitting in the chair knowing they're all getting up there testifying for the state, even if some of them, in my opinion, in your trial and maybe in this trial, don't necessarily think that person should go to prison, but they're getting up there and they're testifying against you. What does it feel like sitting in that chair watching that?
It was difficult. It was difficult because, some of those state witnesses, they were colleagues of mine that I knew for 20, 25 years. But I also understood, they were subpoenaed to come. And, in our system, everyone is presumed innocent. And they were there because, they were there to just tell the truth of what they knew. So, I guess in the back of my mind, because I always knew I was innocent and I did nothing wrong, I guess it didn't really bother me that much because I just knew that, they just had they were state witnesses. They were going to come in. I didn't feel good about it. And and there were a couple of them, there were a couple officers that, they took some little parting shots and things like that, I guess, to kind of help the prosecution. But I guess at the end of the day, it wasn't a good feeling, seeing people that I knew get up there. But I also know, that they were subpoenaed to be there and to testify. And all I needed from them was to tell the truth of what occurred or what they knew. And that's it.
Yeah. And that's a good point, Mark. As a lawyer and coming up in the Uvalde case, I am assuming they're going to have some law enforcement experts to say, here's what he should have done. And he didn't do it. And maybe even some people like in your case that were like, I would have gone in there and, done something about it or whatever. Which, in hindsight, I hope that's how people think, I'm going to go in there and save these kids. But when you're in the moment, your training takes over, what you
Okay.
know are the steps you're supposed to take. So how do you deal with that with those experts? Because I think they're the most important
Got it.
legal
Got it.
witnesses in the case. But
Okay.
yeah, what do you think?
So here's what you say. Okay. And it's what I did in Peterson, and it's what I think they're going to do here. So when you do training, I'm assuming the radios are working fine. Well, yeah. You ever do training where the radios are not working properly? Well, no. Well, how important are the radios? Well, there are the only way that we communicate. And in Peterson, the lack of working radios definitely affected everyone on the scene and so many things like that. What you do is you compare what the training should be to what happened here. So do you ever train where the person arrives on the scene and you just don't know where the suspect is? You're not exactly sure right away? Well, no. All the trainings are, okay, you hear the sounds, you know where the sounds are coming from, you know then where the shooter is, and then you go. In Peterson's case, they never had that. They didn't have a pronounced echo and reverberation where you're like, where the hell? You didn't have officers in training telling you shots are fired from the football field hundreds of yards away, and some believing that they were coming from the parking lot over here. And like, it's chaos. You can't properly train for these scenarios. Similarly, I think that they're going to argue the same thing in the Gonzalez case. Like, yes, when you know clearly where the shooter is and you have a shot, then you take them out. Yep. If you don't, then why are we here?
Yeah, and the radios inside the school, we've heard some talk about that. I think it was in the defense's opening. And the FBI guy that testified so far really had nothing to say about Gonzalez, in my opinion, that was relevant to his training or what he should have done. And
by the way, Peter, there's a difference between someone making an announcement over the radio and the officer hearing it.
Yeah.
In other words, they're going to pull out the transcript and go, here it was said that there were kids who were injured. Even like I saw an interview with the second defendant, the Chief Redondo. And while they're making these announcements over the radio that he's being held responsible for, we also know that he's yelling at officers in the hallway certain things. There's no way he can hear then what's being announced. But they're trying to everything's black and white in the prosecution arena. And they're going to go, we're going to hold you accountable for this. You knew there were kids that were bleeding out. You knew this, you knew that. Same thing with Peterson. It doesn't work that way. You've got to give great deference to these officers in a fluid, most stressful situation.
Yeah, I do. I am interested to see the differences in the trial with the chief than in Peterson's case and Gonzalez's case, because, I could see how it would be different. If it's going to be the same prosecution team, I'm not overly confident with what I've seen so far, but it is an interesting situation because people watching want cops to stop school shooters, right?
I do too. So does Scott. We both do.
Absolutely. But so does the world. And so do the people that make the rules, that do the training, that create the SOPs. They all want to stop the school shooters. So they create the procedures they think are best. And if, we all agree that those are the best procedures, the cops have to follow those procedures. And if they go rogue, then now they're violating what the procedures are. And if they go rogue and, God forbid, make it worse, now they're in trouble, right? And I do think that that's something that's hard to get over as a society, that the procedures didn't work really at the end of the day for, whatever the reasons are, the walkie-talkies. And in this case, even, it's like, I don't know if this is going to be an argument for the defense, but we didn't think he could have entered the school here because that door is supposed to be locked. So if we didn't think he could enter there, what are we supposed to do with that information now that, he did because it was unlocked?
So here's what's going to happen, right? What we've learned from Peterson. If you show up to a scene and you don't know where the shooter is and you're waiting for information, we've learned from Peterson, and I through the cross-examination, I was finding out, well, what should he have done? If he doesn't know where the shooter is, they said, well, he doesn't just stay there. Okay, so should he go to the right? Should he go to the left? What if there's more shooters in the parking lot? Then he runs to the left and then to the right. Kids are being killed and he's not in position anymore. So the point is that they're going to now get these officers to just run in a certain direction because you can never just sit still. And that's going to wind up getting people killed. Either officers and or more kids, because they need protection until you know precisely where the shooter or shooters are. That nobody wants to be prosecuted. So now cops are thinking, I got to cover my own ass. Now, how does that work? Oh, yeah. It means I just need to move, even if I don't know where shots are coming from, even if that puts me in a position where I'm going to be completely out of play and it'll be more harmful to those there.
Scott, what's it like sitting there and listening to Mark argue for things like, because a big deal in this case are the autopsy photos. I know there were some photos you guys wanted to keep out of your trial. What's it like just listening to the lawyers argue and hearing some rulings not go your way when Mark is pretty passionate? They should go your way, and this is really bad, and we need to keep this out. And now it's going to go into the jury, and it's going to affect them because it affects you to look at them. What does it feel like sitting back with no power, no control, and you just have to rely on somebody else to be your voice?
Peter, it makes me kind of look back at the trial, and I sat in that defendant's chair, and there were times it seemed like I was Nicholas Cruz, that they were prosecuting Nicholas Cruz when the prosecutor came with those shell casings, hundreds of shell casings, and took them out of the box and had them in plastic bags and were showing them to the jury. Look at all these empty spent shell casings on the first floor, the second floor, the third floor. And even though I wasn't even there, I wasn't even on the scene on the first floor. And they're showing these spent shell casings. I literally, you almost get so nauseous, like, did I kill, am I Nicholas Cruz? They're prosecuting me like I actually had that AR-15 in my hand and I shot those kids. That was the feeling that I was getting as I watched the state pretty much look like they were prosecuting Nicholas Cruz, but they were actually prosecuting me, a law enforcement officer that responded to the scene. And I guess what I see, especially in the Gonzalez trial, when these autopsy photos, were being brought up, and rightfully so, when the defense is talking about, Your Honor, this is way more prejudicial than probative. At this point, we're conceding, we're stipulating that those children were killed. And everybody who knows or is watching this trial, and the state knows, the only reason they want those photos of those poor children that were slaughtered is to get to the emotions of those jurors. So hopefully they'll stop looking at maybe the facts of this case, but they'll be so emotionally charged at looking at those poor kids being slaughtered that we need to hold this guy accountable for those kids' deaths. And to listen to that judge when he made that comment, and I saw that hearing, and he said, well, I believe it's more probative, my jaw dropped. Because
Me too.
Really looking, you're like, no. And that judge, and I honestly believe that judge clearly knows, you start putting photos of those poor children slaughtered and let those jurors sit there and look at those, that clearly, for this officer there, you're making him like he pulled the trigger. I get it. When a defendant is there, you're being charged with a homicide and they're prosecuting your case, and when they have to show that the person has died, yeah, we get it. You're going to show those pictures. But when you're now talking about a police officer who responded to a call and he's trying to figure things out in real time, and we now have the state taking months and years of an investigation and then knowing the timeline every second by second, and then judging that police officer who in real time is trying to figure out what is going on. And then you sit there and you prosecute an officer, and you're talking within seconds of what you now know months later. That's why that adage, hindsight is 20/20, is so true. We can't in society take our police officers and make us robots. We're not going to sit there, and we're not always going to get it right. At the Parkland shooting, I heard shots outside when I initially got to that building. And I was right. The shots that I heard when I got on that scene was when Aaron Feist was shot outside on the west end of the building. When your brain hears shots outside, you react. And you're reacting on real time on what you know, not what we find out 6 months, a year later during an investigation where every video camera is synced and we have a timeline of every second. You can't sit there and take our police officers in this country and hold us responsible what we learned months and years later and say, you should have got it right. And because you didn't, now your liberty is at stake. We can't do that to our police officers.
Yeah. And I mean, from my perspective, which may be a little bit different from your two, I don't have a problem at all. And I mean, I don't think you will in the way that I'm going to phrase it, but I don't have a problem at all holding police officers accountable when they screw up or don't do their job or don't do enough or do too much. Like, I think we should. I think we have to. I think that's the only way we keep law and order in the society and the good cops from the bad cops. But they've got to prove what Gonzalez did or didn't do. They have to get specific, and they have to prove in this very short period of time, because that was a weird thing. And maybe it's just because I'm thinking about yours as the test case, but it was a very weird thing from the prosecutor to limit that time. But they've got to prove how he was criminally negligent in that time period.
1 minute.
Yeah, it's crazy.
1 minute.
I don't get it.
When he's saying, I didn't see, and the shooter did go in on the other opposite side of the school. That's it. So yeah, I hope that he's acquitted. Again, getting it wrong, if that's even what happened, and I'm not even conceding that, doesn't mean that it's criminal. There's something different. You fire someone, you sue them civilly, hold officers accountable. We're fine with that. But criminal is totally different.
So New Year's Eve just recently passed, and when I got the sponsorship with Z-Biotics, one of my buddies really stuck out as the perfect one to gift this to for Christmas before New Year's so that he could try it out. And I will tell you, he was incredibly impressed. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle the rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's a buildup of this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for rough days after drinking. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. So just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. If you're ready to try it, go to zbiotics.com/LYK now. You'll get 15% off your first order when you use LYK at checkout. Plus, it's backed by a 100% money-back guarantee, so there's no risk. Subscriptions are also available for maximum consistency. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LYK and use code LYK at checkout for 15% off. Yeah, if people lose their jobs and things because they screw up, or if the SOPs are not good and they should have known or they should have spoken up or whatever it may be, there's bureaucrats and there's all sorts of things and red tape you have to get through for all of that. But it's just different than when you have criminal statutes and there is immunity and there's sovereign immunity and there's different things and protections in place that are all at play here. But when it comes down to it, when you criminally charge an individual person for their individual actions, that's what you have to prove. And that's what a jury has to find that the state proves beyond a reasonable doubt.
Peter, I just thought of a question. I want to ask
Yes.
you this hypothetical. Let's say an officer shows up on the scene, and unlike Peterson, unlike Gonzalez, he sees an armed shooter walking in, and he's right there, and he can take him out, and he's going to go right into the school, right? And he has that opportunity. Let's make the facts egregious, right? And he does absolutely nothing. But let's say the facts are that the officer testified, I did see him, I could have taken him out, but I had an extraordinary panic attack. I just freaked out. Something took control of me where I completely and thoroughly just broke down. It wasn't conscious, right? Because of the stress of everything, and I just freaked out. My Vietnam days came back or whatever. I don't know if I'm dating myself. Something happened, right? Where they physically just broke down. Is that a crime now?
I would say a jury might convict on that.
You had a chance to kill the killer and you didn't. We need to look at the circumstances that he was confronted with, is all I'm saying. So I'm throwing that out to you. Is that a crime? Is it
I think a jury might convict on that. I do.
Oh, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I know a jury would.
I know you didn't. I think that, again, that would be right in the bullseye of civil negligence. And I think it'd be difficult to prove, again, that it gets that elevated egregiousness to be a criminal negligence case. And that's what people don't understand is, like, leaving, your kid in the car to go, do cocaine in the house and they die because they, have heat exhaustion or whatever. That's criminal negligence and child endangerment. And that's what it looks like, making those decisions, saying, I know something bad can happen, I'm going to leave them there. They didn't do it to their child on purpose, but that's criminal negligence. That's the child neglect that we're talking about. And that's very different than, somebody was chasing us and I got out of the car to try to figure out who it was and they were shooting at me and I hid behind the house and my kid ended up in the car for a long time. That's different. It's like all these scenarios and factual differences and nuances make a difference when it comes to, is this a criminal case? Is it a civil case? Is it neither? Or is it both? Because all of those things can be true. It can be not criminal, but it can be civil. It can be both. It can be neither. And the facts are still coming out. From my perspective on this one, I feel like I know Peterson's case pretty well because I watched the entire trial. This one, we're only a couple days into it. So we'll see what else comes out. I know you know more about it. But from my perspective, Scott, when you're looking at this case, at the Uvalde case, do you notice differences? Do you notice similarities? How much did you know about it before the trial started?
I did know about. I did know that the state was prosecuting, this police officer. I actually thought he was the school resource officer for the school.
So did I.
And now I'm finding out he was actually the school resource officer for the high school, and he just responded to a car crash. So I'm learning those facts about what happened. So yeah, I did know that they were doing it, and I was like, it's like, oh my God, again, and it's a school shooting, and I'm kind of seeing that it looks like with a lot of these prosecutions, they're doing it on the high profile type of case, not the everyday, type of case. They're doing it where it's a mass school shooting or something very large where, people want a pound of flesh. They want accountability, and unfortunately, everybody wants the police to get it right. And then when they look and as they decipher through the investigation what actually occurred, and that they see things, didn't go the way that they think it should have happened. Everyone, people now, they want a pound of flesh. And that's where I think the politics get involved too with it today, that it's not just looking for justice. It's, this is what the victims want, and we're going to give it to them, regardless if we think it's justice at the end of the day, or if we're going to create an injustice by prosecuting, a law enforcement officer that maybe we don't even believe we even have the facts and have, probable cause to get a conviction. But we're going to do it because we're going to, unfortunately, we're going to appease the families. And I think that's what we're seeing. And this isn't the only case. You've got that case, you remember, in Broward County with the UPS. I don't know if you remember, with the Metro-Dade cops, when they got into a shootout with a guy who hijacked a UPS truck, and rounds were fired at the truck, and an innocent bystander was shot. And Broward County is charging, I believe, some of those officers with manslaughter. So it now, and that's the opposite. That kind of when you look at the theory, they went and was charging me, saying you failed to act. Here they're taking officers in a shootout and saying, well, you went overboard. So it's like, now we're going to go both ways. You either did too much and you made a mistake, and now we're going to hold you criminally liable, or we felt you didn't do enough, and we're going to hold you criminal liable. So it's a slippery slope.
To think about what cops go through and the dangers they face, that's so unlike, what Mark and I deal with every day, and the decisions they have to make and how important they are. And that's what I was talking about, not doing enough or doing too much. I do see two big differences in this case from your case. There's a bunch, but the two biggest ones to me might be the shooter died in this case. So maybe they really feel like as a community, they didn't get justice. In your case, still, he didn't get the death penalty, but, gets life. So, maybe some would have seen that as some kind of justice. And then number two, my personal opinion and view, the videos that circulated the media in this case seemed infinitely worse for law enforcement than in your case. When I first saw it, I was pretty enraged, I'll be honest. And they were hard to watch. And I could understand thinking these cops got to pay, just generally feeling that way before you put your lawyer hat on and think about things legally. So I do think those are two big differences. Mark, what do you think?
I thought you were going to say the opposite, because the video of Scott, it looks like he's not going in. They make it seem his chief told the world that he should have gone in to kill the killer, making us all believe erroneously that he knew precisely where the shooter was located. And there he is, the video of Scott showing him just walking back and forth and not going in. I thought that's what you're going to say, because that was pretty damning stuff. They kept playing that video, but we broke it down to say, look what he's doing. He's actually telling kids to get back.
Maybe you've changed my brain and how I see that video then.
Yeah, maybe. I always looked at the video with Uvalde as the presumption is cops don't want kids to die. Their actions generally are in favor of trying to save kids and trying to kill killers. So if they chose to freeze and not go in for 77 minutes or whatever, there must be an explanation. And from what I'm hearing, again, they might have gotten it wrong, but I understand why they didn't go in.
Can I interject?
Absolutely.
I agree with you, Peter, because when you looked at the video in Uvalde, I think what was the most disturbing was, when they were in the hallway, and then you get one officer, he walks over, puts some hand sanitizer on his hands, and there another guy gets on his cell phone. And people will look and say, wait a minute, there's people that are dying in that classroom, because obviously at that moment, we know everything what happened. So of course you're going to be outraged when you see, a group of officers in a hallway just feet from where this shooter or shooters are. And they're all just kind of standing by, and they're waiting and they're waiting. And of course, as a human being, when we know our kids are we find out have been shot and slaughtered in that classroom, of course we're going to react and go, "Oh my God, why didn't you go in sooner?" Because obviously we know what happened. So when I look at those officers, obviously somebody had to be in charge in that hallway. And maybe who was ever in charge in that hallway told them, you stand down, and we're waiting for whatever reason that may be. I don't know. There might have been officers in that hallway that said, no, let's go. But unless we know the facts and what was going on, especially even with radio communications, Peter, that's one thing, when you look at Uvalde and you look at Parkland, the wireless 911 calls in the Parkland shooting, I don't know if you know this, they went to another police agency.
Yeah.
They went to
that happened in your trial. That came up.
Yeah, that went to I work for the Broward Sheriff's Office. The wireless 911 calls from inside the 1200 building, they went to Coral Springs. They didn't go to BSO, meaning when I heard those shots outside, we never received any information from our dispatch that there's a shooter in that building. There's gunshot victims in that building. None of that was ever relayed to me or the other deputies on the scene. They went to Coral Springs. That's why when Coral Springs got on the scene, they went right to the 1200 building. They had the intel. They knew from the wireless 911 calls. That's why when we talk about communications, it's so important to understand.
And the public never knew that. They didn't know that.
So it was easier.
And through cross-examination, I asked the dispatcher, what would have taken to patch the radios, just so you guys are all on the same page? She's literally like, click, click, like seconds like that. Yeah, and no one told you to do that? No. Instead, let's just sacrifice Scott Peterson. Everybody look over here, not over here.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's like when you start comparing some of the, these different mass shootings, you do have, and you're going to hold the police accountable. Well, the first thing you do have to look at what information is the officer getting. That's why in the Uvalde, we're kind of seeing, and people are questioning the officer because I believe there's a witness, a teacher who sat there and told the officer he's in the building. I don't know if that's true or not. But obviously, when you put in these other facts into the case, it can flip, how jurors are going to, how they're going to judge that officer by them, we're like here in the Parkland shooting, I took cover. I thought the shots were outside, and I was trained for 30 years. You're outside, shots are being fired at you. You take cover. You don't just stand out like a sitting duck. And that's what I did. Never having any intel or knowing that there was an active shooter. That's why it's so important that when you're looking at the police officer's accountability, you have to know, what did he know in real time? And that's how you have to judge these officers. You can't judge them what we learned 6 months of an investigation, you have to judge them on what they actually knew. And you can hold them accountable. Like you said, Peter, if you do wrong and you screw up, you know what? Then you've got to pay the piper. Perfect example is Mark talked about the shooting, about the officer knowing the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando. There was an off-duty police officer working at that bar. He saw the shooter go inside, saw the rifle, watched him go in, heard the gunfire, and called out to dispatch what was going on. Never went into the building. So it has happened where we've had officers, that
Scott, he may have an explanation too. Let's not throw him under the bus.
No.
We don't know what his story is.
Oh, no. What I'm saying is he chose to do what he needed to do, and that was his decision. You can't judge someone what they're doing in real time. That's what I'm getting at. You're not there. You have to know in real time what's going on.
Yes.
Yeah. I really appreciate it, you guys. I mean, this was invaluable. This was like something that I think will really help people understand what it's like for these lawyers and clients. Hopefully there's not a lot more like this in your situation, but what they're thinking, what they're going through as we're in the middle of another trial similar to this. Any parting words, Mark, you've got?
Well, first of all, thank you for always being fair. I remember when Scott and I were feeling like the media was all against us. We talked about your podcast and how you were at least open. You weren't like pro Peterson. You were just being open. That to us was refreshing. We would take anybody who would just be open to knowing what the facts were. And you discussed both sides. That's it. Like you just were fair. So we thank you for that. Yep. We think that what you do is extremely valuable. I'm glad you gave me this platform. As busy as I am preparing for my federal trial Monday, I'm grateful for the time that I had. And it was wonderful to see my dear friend Scott here.
Thanks.
So thank you.
Likewise. Peter, likewise. Like I said, I love your podcast. Keep it going. You're one of the few that are out there that, you really sit there and you tell people, you know what, take your time, listen to the facts, then make your conclusion. So that's great. You got a great podcast. Love it.
I really appreciate it, you guys. Thank you so much for coming on. For everybody listening, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I can't wait to read the comments on this one. But until next time, we're out of here.